Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Luffy awakened his Gear 5 powers from the very beginning? Just how would the story change? Could he save characters like Ace from turning into a donut? Or would he make everything worse? Well, everything starts the same as the original, with Luffy eating the Gomu Gomu no Mi and getting his powers. However, he wouldn't awaken Gear 5 just yet. This happens way later, during his encounter with the Sea King. You see, in the original timeline, back in Wano, one of the big reasons why Luffy awakened Gear 5 was because it was triggered by his near-death experience after being defeated by Kaido on Onigashima. His heart stopped, and the Gomu Gomu no Mi awakened, acting as a resurrection mechanism, bringing him back to life and granting him his Gear 5 along with its insane Looney Tunes abilities. Now, why is this important? Well, during Luffy's encounter with the Sea King, Luffy nearly died if it weren't for Shanks. So here, we would assume that Shanks would arrive a bit too late, and Luffy gets swallowed in the process. However, just as Luffy is about to die while in the Sea King's stomach, the fruit, which has been waiting 800 years for someone whose soul matches the god of freedom, reacts instantly. His heart stops for a split second from oxygen deprivation. The fruit awakens, and Luffy's body turns full Gear 5 without him even knowing the name. Inside the Sea King, he bounces like a cartoon pinball, stretches the stomach walls like rubber sheets, turns the digestive acid into bouncy clouds, and literally cartoon punches his way out, while laughing his head off. Shanks sees a tiny kid explode out of the Sea King, covered in white lightning and clouds, hair white, eyes swirling like cartoony stars, turning the ocean surface into rubber for a second so he can bounce back to the boat. Shanks is stunned. He always knew the fruit was special, which was why he stole it from the world government in the first place, but he never expected it to be this bizarre. He still gives Luffy the hat like before, but this time he doesn't lose his arm, which kind of kills his aura a bit, cause, let's be honest, he does look cooler with one arm. Anyway, Luffy passes out right after, and the awakening deactivates. From that moment, every time Luffy gets genuinely excited or pushed, he can flip into Gear 5 at will. He just thinks of it as super mode until he learns the real name later. The downside, however, is still there. It drains stamina hard on a tiny body, so he can only use it in short bursts at first. Shanks trains him a little on how to control this power, further giving better control of his abilities. From here, everything goes the same as the original story. Luffy meets Zoro, asks him to join his crew, and the two eventually end up at Orange Town. Here, Luffy would meet Buggy. However, unlike before, Luffy turns Gear 5 and effortlessly destroys Buggy in a matter of seconds, shocking Zoro in the process. Everything stays the same with Nami and Usopp joining the crew. Since Luffy is much stronger here, he would effortlessly defeat all the villains from the previous arcs like Captain Kuro and Captain Morgan. The rest of the arcs stay the same as the original up until Baratie, and things get a bit interesting. Here, Luffy would effortlessly take down Don Krieg, but would be met by Mihawk. Zoro still loses. Luffy, seeing Zoro get cut down, would get angry, awaken Gear 5 almost instantly, and effortlessly go blow for blow with Mihawk. Now, even though Luffy in his Gear 5 form is really strong, he is still vulnerable to slashing attacks, and Mihawk would be able to land a decent amount of damage on Luffy, eventually giving him the iconic scar he gave to Zoro. But here, Luffy manages to outclass Mihawk, giving him the win, but he would be severely wounded. Mihawk praises the crew and leaves the scene. Nami, witnessing just how powerful Luffy is, wouldn't think twice about betraying them like she did in the original timeline. Instead, she waits for Luffy to recover from his wounds before pleading with him to help her take down Arlong. Luffy at first disagrees, but eventually decides to help Nami free the villagers. They would eventually arrive at Kokoyashi village, and Luffy would swoop in there, taking down Arlong and his men and saving everyone. The crew, seeing Luffy's strength, would immediately grant him his respect, and they would actually be a bit terrified of Luffy's power. Just like before, the crew would meet Captain Nezumi, who would witness Luffy's power and report it to the world government. He would tell them of Luffy's hair color turning white and his terrifying power, and the world government would be shocked to find out that Luffy has the devil fruit they have been looking for 800 years, and is indeed the reincarnation of Joy Boy, increasing his bounty by a whole lot more than the original timeline to about 500 million berries. From here onward, everything stays the same as the original, with the crew arriving at Logtown. When Buggy traps Luffy on the execution platform, Luffy effortlessly frees himself, defeating everyone before Dragon even arrives. This means that the lightning that he used to save Luffy never happens in this timeline. Because of his insanely high bounty, Smoker would end up catching Luffy, but would lose. Even though Luffy wouldn't have Haki to help him fight against a Logia user like Smoker, his Gear 5 abilities would allow him to rubberize Smoker, turning him into rubber and using him like a skipping rope, ending the fight in a matter of seconds. From here, the crew would set sail. Now I know I skipped Whiskey Peak, but considering that the opponents there wouldn't be much of a challenge with this version of Luffy, not much would change, and they would get easily cooked. Now at Little Garden, here things would go way differently. Because of Luffy destroying basically everyone he has encountered so far, both Dory and Brogy would literally praise and worship Luffy as the sun god, forming an alliance earlier later on in this story. Just like before, Luffy faces Mr. 3, but effortlessly defeats the villain. This arc goes pretty smoothly, without any member of the crew sustaining any major injuries. However, since Luffy is basically mopping the floor with everyone, the crew never gains experience to get stronger, and this could have some massive ripple effects later in the story. And if you want to see that happen, consider hitting the subscribe button. Moving on to Drum Island. Here things stay pretty much the same as the original, except Luffy effortlessly destroys Wapol's ship. Chopper would still join the crew, and the Straw Hats will set on to Alabasta. Here, both Luffy and the crew face Baroque Works' top officers like Mr. 1. They eventually meet Crocodile, and Luffy would get beaten up badly because he doesn't have Haki to take care of a Logia user like Crocodile. However, Luffy awakens his Gear 5. Now, even though Luffy doesn't have Haki, just like the way he was able to defeat Smoker in his Gear 5 form, he would be able to do the same to Crocodile. He would just use his Toon Force abilities to solidify Crocodile's sand body, taking him down with ease. Because Luffy takes down Crocodile way earlier in the fight, just like before, Luffy would still save Robin from the ruins. Having nowhere else to go and witnessing Luffy's insane power, she initially treats the crew as a temporary refuge. Over time, she becomes true friends with them because they treated her with genuine kindness, defended her against the world government, and gave her a reason to live and a family to belong to. At Skypiea, things go way differently. Here, everything goes the same until Enel shows up. Because Luffy is much stronger once he awakens his Gear 5, Enel is in deep trouble. He gets defeated easily. These victories so far have been quite easy, giving both Luffy and the Straw Hats overconfidence in their abilities. However, they soon get a reality check once they land at Long Ring Longland, and here they meet Admiral Aokiji. Because Luffy has basically been doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting, the crew would be way too weak, meaning they would get absolutely destroyed, leaving only Luffy to duke it out with the Admiral. Here, Luffy would awaken Gear 5. He would turn Aokiji's ice to rubber, but he will quickly realize something. You see, so far Luffy hasn't met anyone who is strong enough to stall him out, and Gear 5 runs out of stamina really fast. Luffy will get frozen, but since he saved Alabasta, Aokiji decides to release both him and his crew. Everything stays the same as the original, and the Straw Hats eventually go to Water 7. Here, Robin would still let herself get captured by CP9 to protect the Straw Hats from the world government. Just like before, the crew would come to save Robin. Unlike before where they got defeated thanks to Luffy, the battle would be much easier. He would defeat the entire CP9 with ease, and they would save Robin, leaving Water 7 way earlier than they did in the original timeline. Since they saved Robin this early, they never go to Eni's lobby, which means they wouldn't meet and bond with Frankie. Since that happens, Frankie never joins the Straw Hats, which would be a huge problem since some of their technological weapons and an amazing ship like the Thousand Sunny would never be built, meaning the Straw Hats would be losing really helpful assets without even knowing. Here, both Zoro and Sanji will get captured. In the original timeline, Luffy got captured off-screen. However, with his Gear 5 abilities, no doubt he would save both Sanji and Zoro and take down Moria. Because Moria was defeated quickly, the Straw Hats and all victims on Thriller Bark would have received their shadows back before sunrise, likely reducing injuries to crew members. However, the biggest change would be the timing of Bartholomew Kuma's arrival. If Luffy was not completely exhausted and incapacitated from the intense fight with Super Moria, he might have been able to fight Kuma, or at least escape, potentially preventing Zoro's iconic "nothing happened" sacrifice at Sabaody Archipelago. Now at this point, Luffy's strength is getting more and more recognized by everyone, and his bounty would only increase, eventually reaching 1 billion berries. Just like before, Luffy would still punch a world noble and still get Kizaru sent after him. Just like before, Rayleigh would appear to take care of Kizaru, leaving Luffy and the Straw Hats to face Kuma. While Luffy was able to defeat all his opponents so far, like Smoker and Crocodile without Haki, against Kuma, it becomes a huge disadvantage. You see, Kuma's Pawpaw Fruit enables him to repel any physical attack and teleport, making him nearly untouchable by pre-time skip Luffy. Without Haki, Luffy cannot overcome Kuma's durability or teleportation, meaning both Luffy and his crew would still get teleported. Now Luffy, like before, would end up going to Amazon Lily, charming Boa with his irresistible charm, and getting her to help him break into Impel Down. Just like before, however, Luffy would make quick work of everyone including the Warden Magellan, and reach the lower levels. However, Ace would still be moved to Marineford. Luffy still breaks out a couple of prisoners, and takes them to Marineford in order to save his brother Ace. Now at Marineford, here is where things go way differently than the original timeline. Here, Luffy would immediately awaken his Gear 5 abilities, and would proceed to save Ace before he is executed. He immediately rushes in, and rubberizes his surroundings, same way he did in his fight against Kaido, and shoots both him and Ace to the sky, saving Ace in the process. Here, Whitebeard arrives, and is brutally injured. Ace, seeing this, would try to rush to the battle, but Luffy tells him to wait there, and he arrives just in time to save Whitebeard in his Gear 5 form. Here, Luffy takes down everybody. Eventually, like before, Blackbeard would arrive to take Whitebeard's Devil Fruit, but he would be met by Luffy in his Gear 5 form, and with the combined combined efforts of Luffy and an awakened Whitebeard, they would effortlessly take Blackbeard down, meaning there would be no Blackbeard in this version of the story. Sadly, due to the injuries, Whitebeard would end up dying, but would share one final moment with Ace, making him the captain of the Whitebeard Pirates. This scene would break Ace. From here, Rayleigh would still corner Luffy, asking to train him. After witnessing Whitebeard's death, Luffy accepts and still sends that letter, telling his crew to get stronger so they can stop anyone from ever getting hurt in the future. The 2-year time skip still happens like the original timeline. By this time, Luffy has already trained Haki, mastering every form of Haki, making him a whole lot stronger. But Luffy is not the only one who gets stronger, because the whole crew gets stronger as well. Just like before, they would reunite and they would sail to Fishman Island. So when they hit Fishman Island, Hody Jones and his entire army get absolutely bodied by the Straw Hats in a matter of seconds. At Punk Hazard, Caesar Clown still gets captured the same way. The alliance with Law still forms, but now the Straw Hats are so notorious that the entire underworld and the world government are watching them like hawks, increasing each of their bounties by a whole lot and making them a terrifying crew. Dressrosa comes next. Here, since Ace is still alive, that means the Mera Mera no Mi would still be with him, meaning there'd be no competition for the Mera Mera no Mi, meaning Luffy wouldn't meet Cavendish and the others, which would ultimately lead to the Grand Fleet never being created. Also, Ace being alive means that Sabo wouldn't regain his memories and wouldn't reunite with his brothers on this island. Just like before, Luffy would encounter Doflamingo, but would destroy him in a matter of seconds. From here, everything stays the same as the original story eventually until we arrive at Whole Cake Island, and this arc would be a piece of cake for the Straw Hats. No pun intended. Here, Luffy would face Cracker and would effortlessly take him down by turning all his biscuits into rubber. He would then meet Katakuri. The battle wouldn't be as easy, but thanks to Gear 5's Toon Force abilities and unpredictability, Katakuri's observation, Haki would be useless, granting Luffy the win here. After defeating Katakuri, Luffy faces Big Mom and would effortlessly defeat her with ease. Everything stays the same as the original, with the Straw Hats landing at Wano. Because Big Mom has been defeated, this means she wouldn't be able to help assist Kaido, making the battle a lot smoother. Just like before, Kaido would overwhelm the Straw Hats pretty easily. Seeing his friends defeated, Luffy would be enraged and would face Kaido head on. He would land a lot of damaging attacks. Unlike before, where Luffy barely damaged Kaido in their first encounter, Luffy would be able to not only damage Kaido, but beat him, using his Toon Force abilities to manipulate his environment, finally putting Kaido down and saving all of Wano. For the next few weeks, the crew rebuilds the country side by side with the citizens, the Scabbards, and the Whitebeard remnants. Momonosuke becomes the official shogun, but the Straw Hats, by the time they finally set sail again, every Straw Hat is at their absolute peak, stronger than they ever were in the original timeline because they earned every inch of that power together. Their bond grew stronger. They still face terrifying enemies and threats from the world government, but they come out on top, and it is pretty safe to say they eventually find the One Piece. Now that was a cool what if, but if you want to see more cool what ifs, check out these other videos.